The electromagnetic pulse weapon looked like something from a science fiction movie, sleek, compact, and utterly silent. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun had called it a toy gun during training exercises at Fort Braxton, North Carolina. He'd laughed. When technical specialist Riley Patterson demonstrated its capabilities, dismissing it as another piece of experimental equipment that would never see real combat. But 6 months later, in the mountains of Eastern Europe, that same toy gun would be the only thing standing between his squad and complete annihilation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn morning at Fort Braxton carried the crisp bite of October air as soldiers filed into training facility Delta 7. Marcus Chun adjusted his combat vest and glanced around the sterile briefing room, its white walls lined with tactical diagrams and weapon specifications. At 28, Marcus had already completed 3 overseas deployments and earned a reputation as one of the most skilled marksmen in the 82nd Airborne Division. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was earned through years of combat experience. Where traditional weapons had never failed him, Riley Patterson stood at the front of the room, her slight frame dwarfed by the array of conventional weapons mounted on the wall behind her. At 24, she held a Ph.D. in electromagnetic engineering from MIT and had spent the last 2 years developing classified weapons systems for the Department of Defense. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held an intensity that most of the soldiers in the room failed to notice. They saw a young woman with no combat experience trying to sell them on untested technology. Today we're introducing the EMP-7 portable electromagnetic pulse device. Riley began, her voice steady despite the dismissive murmurs rippling through the assembled squad. She lifted a device roughly the size of a submachine gun, its matte black surface interrupted only by a small digital display and a single trigger mechanism. This weapon doesn't fire bullets. It doesn't create explosions. Instead, it generates a focused electromagnetic pulse capable of disabling electronic systems within a 50-meter radius. Marcus exchanged glances with Corporal Jake Hendricks, his spotter and closest friend in the unit. Jake's weathered face carried the same skeptical expression that Marcus felt brewing in his chest. They'd seen plenty of experimental weapons come and go, most of them failing spectacularly when subjected to real-world conditions. "With respect, ma'am," Marcus spoke, his voice carrying the authority of his rank and experience. "How exactly is this supposed to help us in combat? Our enemies aren't robots. They're flesh and blood, and they respond to conventional firepower." Riley's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught a slight tightening around her eyes. "Modern warfare isn't just about flesh and blood anymore, Sergeant Chun. Today's enemies rely heavily on electronic equipment, night vision goggles, communication devices, targeting systems, vehicle electronics, explosive timers. The EMP-7 can neutralize all of these simultaneously." She moved to a table displaying various electronic devices, radios, tablets, night vision equipment, and what appeared to be components from an improvised explosive device. "Let me demonstrate." The weapon emitted no sound, no flash, no indication that it had fired except for a brief blue flicker on its display. Within seconds, every electronic device on the table went dark. The radios died mid-transmission, the tablet screens went black, and the LED displays on the explosive components flickered out completely. "Impressive parlor trick," Marcus said, though he had to admit the demonstration was more effective than he'd expected. "But what happens when my rifle jams and I need backup? Can your toy gun put down an enemy soldier charging at my position?" Several soldiers chuckled at the toy gun comment, and Marcus saw Riley's jaw clench slightly. She'd clearly heard similar dismissals before. "The EMP-7 isn't designed to replace conventional weapons," she replied evenly. It's designed to give you advantages that conventional weapons can't provide. Imagine being able to disable an enemy's entire communication network with a single shot. Imagine rendering their night vision useless, their GPS systems inoperative, their vehicle electronics dead. Captain Amanda Torres, the commanding officer overseeing the training exercise, stepped forward. At 35, she'd earned her position through a combination of tactical brilliance and the ability to see potential where others saw problems. Sergeant Chun, you'll be partnering with Specialist Patterson for today's field exercise. I want you to give this technology a fair evaluation. Marcus bit back his initial response. Fair evaluation or not, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were wasting valuable training time on equipment that would never prove useful in real combat situations. His M4 carbine had served him faithfully through 3 deployments. His sidearm had saved his life more than once. This silent, seemingly harmless device felt like a solution in search of a problem. The field exercise took place in a mock, urban environment constructed specifically for training purposes. The facility consisted of concrete buildings, narrow alleyways, and hidden observation points designed to simulate the challenges of modern urban warfare. Marcus's squad would be conducting a simulated raid on a terrorist stronghold with opposing forces equipped with night vision, communications equipment, and various electronic surveillance systems. Riley walked beside Marcus as they approached the staging area. The EMP-7 secured across her back alongside her standard issue equipment. She'd completed basic combat training, but Marcus could see the uncertainty in her movements. Academic knowledge was one thing. Applying that knowledge under simulated combat stress was entirely different. Nervous? Marcus asked, not unkindly. Despite his skepticism about her weapon, he felt a professional responsibility to ensure her safety during the exercise. Not about the weapon, Riley replied. I've tested it hundreds of times under various conditions. I'm more concerned about keeping up with your squad's pace. Marcus appreciated her honesty. Most civilians attached to military units tried to overcompensate with false bravado. Stay close to me and follow my lead. The weapon might be your expertise, but tactical movement is mine. The exercise began at 1400 hours with Marcus's 8-person squad advancing through the urban environment. Intelligence indicated that the opposing force had established a command center in Building C, protected by a network of electronic surveillance and communication systems. Traditional doctrine would involve suppressing enemy positions with conventional weapons while advancing undercover. Marcus took point, his M4 ready as he led the squad through a series of connected alleyways. Behind him, Jake provided overwatch, while Riley stayed positioned in the middle of the formation, protected by the more experienced soldiers. The rest of the squad, Privates First Class David Kim, Angela Rodriguez, Tommy Walsh, and Sarah Mitchell, maintained their assigned positions with the precision that came from months of training together. The first contact came from an unexpected direction. Instead of engaging with conventional weapons, the opposing force had positioned electronic surveillance equipment at key choke points throughout the urban environment. Motion sensors triggered alerts. Night vision systems provided targeting information to hidden observers, and a sophisticated communication network allowed the enemy to coordinate their response with deadly efficiency. Marcus's squad found themselves pinned down in an alley between buildings A and B, taking simulated fire from multiple positions. The exercise ammunition, modified paintball rounds designed for military training, left bright marks on their equipment and uniforms. Within minutes, 3 members of Marcus's squad had been declared casualties by the exercise observers. This isn't working, Jake called out from his position behind a concrete barrier. They're tracking our every move. Their surveillance network is too sophisticated. Marcus pressed himself against the wall, analyzing their tactical situation. The opposing force had positioned themselves perfectly, using their electronic advantages to counter every conventional approach his squad attempted. Traditional suppressive fire wasn't effective against enemies who could predict their movements through electronic surveillance. "Patterson," Marcus called back to Riley's position. "Can that device of yours reach their surveillance equipment?" "From here?" Riley quickly assessed the tactical situation, her engineering background allowing her to identify the likely positions of electronic equipment based on the enemy's behavior patterns. "The motion sensors are probably mounted on the building corners, about 30 meters from our position, well within the EMP-7's effective range." "Do it." Riley unslung the EMP-7 and aimed it toward the corner of Building B, where logic suggested the primary surveillance equipment would be positioned. The weapon discharged silently, its electromagnetic pulse invisible to the naked eye but devastating to any unshielded electronics within its targeting radius. The change in the tactical situation was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated enemy fire became sporadic and disorganized. Communication between opposing force positions broke down completely. Most importantly, Marcus's squad was no longer being tracked and predicted at every turn. "Move," Marcus commanded, leading his remaining team members in a flanking maneuver that would have been impossible under electronic surveillance. They advanced through a series of positions that brought them to the rear of Building C, approaching the enemy command center from an unexpected direction. The second demonstration of the EMP-7's effectiveness came when they encountered a heavily fortified position, protected by electronic security systems. Conventional doctrine would have required extensive preparation and likely significant casualties to breach such defenses. Instead, Riley disabled the entire electronic network with a single, silent shot. Marcus watched in growing amazement as doors that had been electronically locked swung open, as surveillance cameras went dark, as communication systems died throughout the building. His squad completed the exercise objective with 0 additional casualties, achieving what would have been impossible using conventional weapons alone. During the after-action review, Captain Torres addressed the assembled soldiers with obvious satisfaction. Today's exercise demonstrated the value of integrating new technologies with traditional tactical doctrine. Sergeant Chun's squad achieved their objective with minimal casualties by effectively employing the EMP-7 system. Marcus stood at attention, but his mind was still processing what he'd witnessed. The weapon that he'd dismissed as a toy gun had fundamentally changed the tactical equation. It hadn't replaced conventional weapons. It had made them more effective by eliminating the enemy's technological advantages. After the formal debriefing, Marcus approached Riley as she was securing her equipment. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "I was wrong about your weapon." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Riley looked up from the EMP-7, which she was carefully placing in its protective case. "You weren't entirely wrong. It is unconventional, and it does look different from what most soldiers are used to. But effectiveness in combat isn't always about what something looks like." "No," Marcus replied. "It's about results. And your results today were impressive." They walked together toward the equipment depot, the autumn sun beginning to set behind the training facilities buildings. Marcus found himself curious about the woman who had designed such an innovative weapon system. "How long did it take you to develop this?" he asked. 3 years of research and development, plus another year of testing and refinement," Riley replied. "Most people think the hardest part is the engineering, but actually the biggest challenge was convincing military leadership that electromagnetic warfare has practical applications at the squad level." Marcus understood that challenge intimately. Military culture was inherently conservative, and for good reason. Soldiers' lives depended on equipment that functioned reliably under extreme conditions. Innovation was welcome, but only after thorough testing and proven effectiveness. What made you think this would work? Marcus asked. Riley paused, considering her answer carefully. I studied after-action reports from recent conflicts, looking for patterns in how modern enemies were gaining tactical advantages. Electronic equipment kept appearing as a force multiplier, allowing smaller enemy forces to effectively engage much larger conventional units. I realized that if we could neutralize those electronic advantages, we could shift the tactical balance back in our favor. It was a logical approach, Marcus had to admit. Military conflicts were increasingly influenced by technology, and enemies who couldn't match conventional firepower often relied on electronic systems to level the playing field. The EMP-7 represented a way to remove that technological crutch. Will we see more training with this system? Marcus asked. Captain Torres has requested extended training protocols for several squads, Riley replied. If the results continue to be positive, the EMP-7 could be approved for field deployment within 6 months. 6 months. Marcus filed that information away, wondering if his unit would be selected for the field deployment. Despite his initial skepticism, he found himself hoping they would be. The tactical advantages he'd witnessed during the exercise were too significant to ignore. As they reached the equipment depot, Riley turned to face him. Sergeant Chun, I want you to know that I understand your initial reaction. Soldiers have every right to be skeptical of new equipment. Your lives depend on reliability and effectiveness. I appreciate you giving the EMP-7 a fair evaluation. Marcus nodded, recognizing the professionalism in her statement. Specialist Patterson, if your weapon performs as well in real combat as it did in today's exercise, it's going to save lives. That's what matters. They parted ways at the depot, Riley heading to the technical facilities to analyze data from the day's exercise, while Marcus rejoined his squad for evening chow. But as he walked across the base, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd witnessed something significant. The EMP-7 represented more than just a new weapon system. It represented a new approach to warfare itself. Later that evening, as Marcus cleaned his conventional weapons in the squad bay, Jake approached with his characteristic directness. So what do you really think about the electromagnetic thing? Marcus looked up from his M4, considering his answer. I think it's going to change how we fight. Not replace how we fight, but change it. Give us new options. Think we'll actually see it in combat? I think we might, Marcus replied. And I think when we do, we're going to be glad we trained with it. Neither man could have predicted how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how soon Marcus would find himself depending on Riley Patterson's toy gun for his very survival. The notification came through official channels at 0600 hours on a gray February morning. Marcus was completing his pre-dawn workout routine when Captain Torres summoned the entire squad to the briefing room. The urgency in her voice suggested this wasn't another training exercise. Operation Silent Thunder, Torres announced as classified documents were distributed around the table. Intelligence indicates a terrorist cell has established a sophisticated command center in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. They've been coordinating attacks across Eastern Europe using advanced electronic warfare capabilities. Marcus studied. The satellite imagery spread before him. The target compound sat nestled in a valley surrounded by dense forest, its buildings camouflaged but clearly visible to military satellites. What caught his attention immediately were the numerous antennae, arrays and satellite dishes positioned throughout the facility. This isn't a typical terrorist operation, Torres continued. These individuals have access to military-grade electronic equipment, jamming systems, encrypted communications, electronic surveillance networks, and what appears to be coordinated drone capabilities. Conventional assault tactics have failed twice already. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. 2 previous operations had ended in failure, which meant soldiers had likely died attempting what Marcus's squad was now being asked to accomplish. Specialist Patterson will be accompanying the mission as technical support, Torres announced. The EMP-7 system has been approved for field deployment based on training results from the past 6 months. Marcus glanced across the room at Riley, who was studying the intelligence documents with intense concentration. She'd spent those 6 months refining her equipment and training with various squads, earning grudging respect from soldiers who had initially shared Marcus's skepticism. But training was different from combat, and they all knew it. Lieutenant Colonel James Bradford entered the briefing room, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 42, Bradford had overseen special operations across 3 continents and carried the kind of authority that came from making life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. The target facility is protected by electronic countermeasures that have proven effective against conventional assaults, Bradford explained. Previous operations were detected and repelled before they could establish contact with the primary objective. Your mission is to neutralize the electronic defenses and extract intelligence regarding planned attacks on NATO installations. The mission parameters were complex. Marcus's squad would insert via helicopter at a landing zone 5 kilometers from the target. They would approach on foot through mountainous terrain, disable the electronic defenses, breach the compound, and secure intelligence materials before extraction. Timeline: 18 hours maximum before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Weather conditions will be challenging, Torres added, pointing to meteorological data. Temperatures range from -10 to -20 Celsius with possible snow. Squalls, visibility may be limited. Marcus absorbed the tactical details while simultaneously running mental calculations. Night insertion in mountainous terrain during winter conditions, against an enemy with sophisticated electronic capabilities, with an 18-hour window for completion. The mission carried significant risks even under ideal circumstances. Questions? Bradford asked. Sir, Marcus spoke up. What specific electronic threats should we expect beyond the surveillance and communication systems? Riley answered before Bradford could respond. Intelligence suggests they have access to military-grade jamming equipment, capable of disrupting our communications and GPS systems. Possibly automated defense systems with electronic targeting capabilities. The drone network appears to be their primary reconnaissance asset. And the EMP-7 can handle all of that? Jake asked, his skepticism evident despite months of successful training exercises. Within its operational parameters, yes, Riley replied confidently. But we'll need to get within 50 meters of each target system for maximum effectiveness. 50 meters. Marcus understood the tactical implications immediately. They would need to approach close enough to enemy positions to use Riley's weapon effectively, which meant operating within range of conventional weapons as well. The EMP-7's advantages came with corresponding risks. Mission launch is scheduled for 2,100 hours, Bradford announced. Use the remaining time for equipment preparation and final tactical planning. The squad dispersed to begin their pre-mission routines, each soldier following personal rituals developed over years of combat deployments. Marcus found himself checking and rechecking his conventional weapons, while simultaneously reviewing technical specifications for the EMP-7 system. Riley approached him during equipment preparation, carrying a modified version of her electromagnetic weapon. I've made some modifications based on feedback from training exercises, she explained. Improved battery life, enhanced targeting system, and better integration with standard tactical equipment. Marcus examined the updated weapon, noting its more rugged construction and simplified controls. The engineers had clearly listened to soldier feedback and incorporated practical improvements. How many shots does it have? He asked, 12 full power discharges before requiring battery replacement, Riley replied. Each battery pack weighs 2 pounds, and I'll be carrying 4 spare packs. 12 shots. Marcus filed that limitation away as a critical tactical consideration. Unlike conventional ammunition, the EMP-7's effectiveness was limited by power consumption rather than physical projectiles. They would need to use each shot strategically. The helicopter flight to the insertion point took 3 hours through increasingly hostile weather conditions. Marcus sat across from Riley in the aircraft's cargo bay, watching her conduct final systems checks on her equipment. Her nervousness was visible but controlled, the natural anxiety of someone facing combat for the first time. First deployment? Marcus asked over the helicopter's engine noise. Yes, Riley replied honestly. I've trained for this, but I know training isn't the same as actual combat. Marcus nodded, remembering his own first deployment years earlier. The most important thing is to follow your training and trust your squad. We've worked together long enough to anticipate each other's actions. What if the EMP-7 doesn't perform as expected under actual combat conditions? It was a fair question, one that Marcus had considered repeatedly during mission planning. Then we adapt and overcome using conventional methods. But based on training results, I don't think that will be necessary. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone, and Marcus felt the familiar pre-combat tension settle over the squad. Each soldier was running through personal checklists, ensuring equipment was secure and ready for immediate action. Upon landing, the insertion went smoothly despite deteriorating weather conditions. Marcus's squad moved out from the landing zone in tactical formation, with Riley positioned in the center of the group where she could be protected while remaining available for technical support. The approach march through the Carpathian Mountains tested every aspect of their training. Snow-covered terrain made movement difficult and increased the risk of detection through visible tracks. Sub-zero temperatures affected equipment performance and human endurance. Limited visibility due to cloud cover and intermittent snow squalls. COMPL ICATED navigation. Marcus led the squad through a series of ridgelines that provided concealment while allowing observation of the target area. After 4 hours of movement, they established an observation post approximately 1 kilometer from the enemy compound. Through his binoculars, Marcus could see the electronic infrastructure that made this target so formidable. Antenna arrays rotated continuously, scanning for approaching threats. Satellite communication dishes maintained contact with external networks. Most concerning were the mobile platforms that appeared to be automated surveillance drones, conducting regular patrols around the compound perimeter. Assessment? Marcus asked Riley, who was studying the enemy positions through her own optical equipment. Primary threat is the surveillance network, she replied quietly. Those rotating antennas are probably radar systems capable of detecting our approach from several kilometers away. The communication systems are maintaining real-time contact with outside support. But the drones are the immediate problem. They're conducting systematic reconnaissance patterns that will detect us if we attempt a conventional approach. Marcus studied the patrol patterns, noting the timing and routes of the automated surveillance. Can you disable the drones first? If I can get within range, yes, but the moment I use the EMP-7, they'll know we're here. We'll need to move fast once I start shooting. Timing would be critical. Marcus began formulating a tactical plan that would maximize the EMP-7's effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy response. They would have one opportunity to get this right. Davidson Rodriguez, Marcus called to 2 of his squad members, establish overwatch positions on the eastern ridge. Kim Mitchell, prepare for a rapid assault on the primary building. Walsh, you're with Patterson and me for the initial electronic neutralization. Each soldier moved to their assigned position with practiced efficiency. Years of training and previous deployments had created an almost telepathic understanding of tactics and timing within the squad. Marcus checked his watch. 0430 hours. Dawn was still 2 hours away, providing maximum concealment for their assault. But the weather was deteriorating further, which could complicate extraction if the operation extended beyond the planned timeline. Overwatch positions established, came Davidson's voice through their encrypted communication system. Assault team ready, reported Kim. Marcus looked at Riley, who was making final adjustments to the EMP-7's targeting system. Ready? Ready, she confirmed. Though Marcus could hear the tension in her voice, the first phase of the assault began with Riley targeting the automated surveillance drones. The EMP-7 discharged silently, its electromagnetic pulse invisible in the pre-dawn darkness. Within seconds, 2 drones fell from the sky like stones, their electronic systems completely disabled. Move, Marcus commanded, leading Riley and Walsh in a rapid advance toward the compound's outer perimeter. The enemy response was immediate but disorganized. Without their automated surveillance network, the defenders couldn't pinpoint the squad's exact location or coordinate an effective counterattack. Marcus heard shouting in multiple languages as enemy personnel attempted to establish visual contact with the attacking force. Riley's second shot disabled the primary radar array, eliminating the compound's long-range detection capability. Her third shot targeted the communication center, severing the enemy's contact with outside reinforcements. But as they approached the compound's inner perimeter, Marcus realized they were facing a more sophisticated defense than intelligence had indicated. Emergency lighting systems activated throughout the facility, suggesting backup power sources that hadn't been affected by the electromagnetic pulses. Worse, he could hear the distinctive sound of diesel generators starting up, indicating that critical systems were being restored. They have hardened backups, Riley called out, recognizing the implications immediately. Some of their equipment is electromagnetically shielded. Marcus absorbed this information while continuing to advance toward the primary objective. The EMP-7 had been effective against the outer defensive systems, but the enemy's most critical capabilities appeared to be protected against electromagnetic attack. Conventional assault from this point, Marcus decided, signaling for Kim and Mitchell to begin their approach to the main building. The firefight that followed tested every aspect of their training and equipment. Enemy defenders, though deprived of their electronic advantages, fought with desperate efficiency. Marcus's squad advanced through a series of covered positions, using conventional weapons and tactics to suppress enemy fire and maintain momentum. Riley stayed close to Marcus throughout the assault, the EMP-7 ready for any remaining electronic threats they might encounter. Her nervousness had transformed into focused determination as the reality of combat replaced theoretical preparation. The breach of the main building revealed the true sophistication of the enemy operation. Banks of computer equipment lined the walls, much of it protected by Faraday cages that had prevented electromagnetic damage. Hard-copy documents and maps covered multiple tables, indicating coordination with terrorist cells across Europe. Intelligence jackpot, Walsh reported, beginning to photograph and collect critical documents, but Marcus's attention was focused on a different concern. Through the building's windows, he could see vehicle headlights approaching through the mountain passes. Enemy reinforcements were arriving ahead of schedule, threatening to trap the squad in the compound before they could complete their mission and reach the extraction point. The situation was about to become significantly more complicated. The convoy of approaching vehicles stretched across the mountain road like a mechanical serpent, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus counted at least 8 trucks, potentially carrying 40 to 50 enemy reinforcements. His squad's 18-hour operational window had collapsed to minutes. "Extract what you can and prepare to move," Marcus ordered, his voice carrying the controlled urgency of a veteran commander facing impossible odds. We've got multiple vehicles inbound, ETA 5 minutes. Walsh and Kim worked frantically to photograph documents and download data from the computer systems that had survived. Rayleigh's electromagnetic assault. Meanwhile, Davidson and Rodriguez maintained overwatch positions, their rifles trained on the access routes to buy precious seconds for intelligence collection. Riley stood near the main server array, studying the sophisticated shielding that had protected the enemy's critical systems. "These Faraday cages are military grade," she reported. "Someone with serious technical knowledge designed this setup." Marcus processed this information while calculating escape routes. The enemy hadn't just been lucky with their electromagnetic protection, they'd been prepared. Someone had anticipated the possibility of EMP attack and taken countermeasures, which suggested intelligence leaks or sophisticated operational security. "Movement on the eastern approach," Davidson's voice crackled through the communication. "System, lead vehicle is approximately 2 minutes out." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Marcus's squad occupied a compound surrounded by open ground, facing overwhelming numerical superiority with limited ammunition and no immediate extraction option. The helicopter wouldn't return for another 6 hours, assuming they could reach the designated pickup zone. "Contingency plan," Marcus announced, activating protocols they'd rehearsed but hoped never to use. "Fighting withdrawal to checkpoint Alpha. Patterson, can the EMP-7 disable vehicle electronics?" "Possibly," Riley replied, checking her weapons. "Power levels. But I'd need direct line of sight at close range. Most military vehicles have some electromagnetic hardening." Close range meant exposing themselves to enemy fire while attempting to disable approaching trucks. Marcus weighed the risks against alternatives and found no better options. Conventional weapons couldn't stop 8 vehicles filled with enemy reinforcements. "Walsh, Kim, finish the intelligence collection," Marcus ordered. "Davidson, Rodriguez, prepare covering fire. Patterson, you're with me for vehicle interdiction." The first enemy truck reached the compound's outer perimeter, just as Marcus and Riley took positions behind a concrete barrier. Through his scope, Marcus could see armed figures dismounting from the vehicles, their movements suggesting professional military training rather than typical terrorist organization. "These aren't ordinary terrorists," Marcus observed, noting the disciplined deployment patterns of the approaching force. Riley sighted through the EMP-7's targeting system, calculating range and angle for maximum effectiveness. 30 meters to the lead vehicle, she reported. "Within optimal range, take the shot." The electromagnetic pulse struck the lead truck's electronic systems with devastating effect. Engine computers failed instantly, causing the vehicle to coast to a stop. Dashboard displays went dark, communication equipment died, and electronic ignition systems ceased functioning. The truck became a 2-ton roadblock, forcing following vehicles to halt or risk collision, but the enemy response demonstrated their professionalism. Instead of panicking at the electronic failure, the dismounted troops immediately established defensive positions and began advancing on foot. Their tactical coordination suggested extensive combat experience. "Second vehicle disabled," Riley reported after her next shot. "But they're adapting faster than expected." Marcus could see enemy forces spreading out across the compound approach, using terrain features and building cover to advance methodically toward their position. These weren't panicked terrorists. They were trained soldiers conducting a professional assault. "All units fighting withdrawal to checkpoint Alpha," Marcus commanded. "Movement by pairs, standard leapfrog pattern." The withdrawal began with Davidson and Rodriguez providing suppressive fire while the rest of the squad moved to secondary positions. Marcus stayed close to Riley, recognizing that her weapon was their primary advantage against the overwhelming enemy numbers. Riley's third shot disabled another vehicle, but return fire was becoming increasingly accurate. Bullets cracked past their position, striking concrete barriers and ricocheting off metal surfaces. The enemy had identified their location and was concentrating fire accordingly. "Movement," Walsh called out, indicating he and Kim had completed their intelligence collection and were ready for withdrawal. Marcus led Riley in a rapid bound to the next covered position, the EMP-7 secured across her back as they sprinted through. Intermittent enemy fire. Behind them, Davidson and Rodriguez maintained suppressive fire before beginning their own withdrawal movement. The enemy pressed their advantage, advancing aggressively while Marcus's squad conducted their fighting withdrawal. Professional military tactics suggested these reinforcements were either special forces or experienced mercenaries, rather than typical terrorist operatives. Checkpoint Alpha was a ridgeline position approximately 500 meters from the compound, offering better defensive terrain and concealment options. But reaching it required crossing open ground while under fire from superior numbers. "Smoke," Marcus called out, and Kim deployed smoke grenades to obscure their movement across the exposed terrain. The artificial fog provided temporary concealment, but also limited visibility for both sides. Marcus led his squad through the smoke by compass bearing, trusting in navigation skills developed through years of training and combat experience. Enemy fire continued throughout their movement, though accuracy decreased due to limited visibility. Marcus could hear orders being shouted in what sounded like Russian, confirming his suspicion that these weren't ordinary terrorists, but professional military personnel. Riley stumbled on the rocky terrain, and Marcus steadied her without breaking. "Stride, how many shots remaining?" he asked. "7 full power discharges," she replied, breathing heavily from the rapid movement. "But I'm concerned about battery performance in these cold temperatures." Temperature effects on electronic equipment, another variable that training exercises couldn't fully replicate. Marcus filed this concern away while continuing to lead the squad toward better defensive positions. They reached Checkpoint Alpha as the smoke began to dissipate, revealing enemy forces spreading across the compound area in pursuit. The ridgeline position offered superior fields of fire and multiple escape routes, but also left them exposed to observation from enemy positions. "Defensive positions," Marcus ordered, and his squad deployed with practiced efficiency. Davidson and Rodriguez established overwatch with their precision rifles, while Walsh and Kim prepared to engage advancing enemy forces with automatic weapons. Marcus positioned himself where he could coordinate the defense while protecting Riley and her specialized equipment. The enemy assault began with suppressive fire from multiple positions, followed by coordinated advances by small teams using fire and movement tactics. Their professionalism was evident in every aspect of their approach. These were trained soldiers conducting a textbook assault. "Range to lead elements?" Marcus asked Davidson, who was tracking targets through his rifle scope. 300 meters. "And closing," Davidson replied. "Count at least 20 personnel in the initial assault wave. 20 confirmed enemies, with potentially 30 more in reserve positions." Marcus's 6-person squad faced overwhelming odds, but their defensive position and superior training provided some advantages. Riley engaged targets with the EMP-7 whenever enemy forces approached within effective range, disabling night vision equipment and communication devices. Each shot created temporary confusion in enemy ranks, but the effect was localized and temporary. "They're adapting to the electromagnetic attacks," Riley observed, starting to rely more on visual signals and non-electronic equipment. Marcus had noticed the same adaptation. Professional soldiers could function without electronic aids when necessary, though their effectiveness decreased significantly. The EMP-7 was buying time and creating tactical advantages, but couldn't single-handedly defeat a determined assault. The firefight continued for 30 minutes, with enemy forces probing the defensive position while Marcus's squad conserved ammunition and maintained their tactical advantage. But ammunition expenditure was becoming a critical concern, and the enemy showed no signs of withdrawing. "Ammunition status?" Marcus called out. 60% remaining, Kim reported, speaking for the squad's automatic weapons. 70%, Davidson added for the precision rifles. Riley checked her EMP-7 power levels. 4 shots remaining. Plus 1 spare battery pack. Limited ammunition against unlimited enemy reinforcements created an unsustainable tactical equation. Marcus began considering options for breaking contact and reaching the extraction point, but every route required crossing terrain dominated by enemy positions. The enemy commander demonstrated tactical intelligence by sending flanking forces around both sides of the ridgeline position. Marcus's squad faced the prospect of being surrounded and eliminated unless they moved quickly. "Prepare for displacement," Marcus ordered. "We can't hold this position indefinitely." But as he studied potential escape routes, Marcus realized their tactical situation had become critical. Enemy forces were closing from 3 directions, limiting movement options and threatening to eliminate his squad entirely. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance initially suggested salvation, but Marcus quickly identified the aircraft as enemy reinforcements rather than friendly extraction. Additional troops were arriving by air, completing the encirclement of his squad's position. Riley looked at Marcus with growing concern as the tactical situation became increasingly desperate. "What do we do now?" Marcus studied the approaching enemy forces, calculating odds and options with the cold professionalism that had kept him alive through 3 previous deployments. His squad was outnumbered, surrounded, and running low on ammunition. Conventional tactics had reached their limits. "We adapt," Marcus replied, his mind already forming a desperate plan that would require every skill they possessed and more luck than they had any right to expect. The enemy helicopter was approaching their position, and Marcus could see additional troops preparing to rappel directly onto the ridgeline. Within minutes, his squad would be facing attack from 4 directions simultaneously. Riley gripped the EMP-7 tighter, understanding that her unconventional weapon might be their only hope for survival. But 4 remaining shots against helicopter delivered. Reinforcements seemed like impossible odds. The situation was about to test everything they had learned about warfare, technology, and survival under extreme conditions. Marcus's earlier skepticism about the toy gun seemed like a lifetime ago, as he prepared to stake his squad's lives on Riley's electromagnetic warfare capabilities. Time was running out, and conventional solutions were no longer sufficient. They would need innovation, courage, and perfect execution to survive the next few minutes. The helicopter grew closer, its rotors beating against the mountain air as enemy forces prepared for their final assault. Marcus's squad was about to face their ultimate test. The enemy helicopter hovered 40 meters above the ridgeline, its rotor whipping snow and debris across Marcus's defensive position. Through the aircraft's open doors he could see repelling equipment being prepared and counted at least 12 additional enemy soldiers, ready to deploy directly onto their position. "Contact left flank," Rodriguez called out, engaging enemy forces attempting to climb the eastern slope of the ridgeline. Her rifle cracked steadily as she targeted individual climbers, but more kept appearing behind fallen comrades. Marcus assessed their tactical situation with brutal honesty. 6 soldiers surrounded by professional enemy forces, with an enemy helicopter preparing to deliver troops directly into their defensive perimeter. Conventional military doctrine offered no solutions for such overwhelming disadvantages. "Patterson," Marcus called to Riley, who was pressed against a boulder nearby. "Can the EMP-7 affect helicopter electronics?" Rayleigh's eyes widened as she understood the implication. "Theoretically, yes, but helicopters have multiple redundant systems. Even if I disable the primary electronics, they might retain enough control for emergency landing." "Emergency landing means they can't deliver those troops onto our position," Marcus replied. "Do it." But the helicopter was maintaining a hover pattern that kept it just beyond the EMP-7's 50-meter effective range. The pilot was either extremely cautious or aware of electromagnetic warfare capabilities. Riley would need a clear shot at closer range to disable the aircraft's electronic systems. "I need to get closer," Riley said. Studying the helicopter's position and movement pattern, Marcus examined the terrain between their current position and locations that would provide effective range against the hovering aircraft. Every potential approach required crossing open ground under direct enemy observation and fire. "Covering fire on my command," Marcus ordered his squad. "Patterson and I are moving to an assault position." Davidson looked at Marcus with the expression of a soldier who understood they were attempting something with minimal chance of success. "How long do you need?" 30 seconds to reach effective range plus firing time, Marcus calculated. "Can you give us that?" "We'll give you what we can," Davidson replied grimly. Marcus led Riley in a rapid sprint across exposed terrain while his squad unleashed concentrated suppressive fire against enemy positions. Bullets cracked overhead and struck the ground around them, but the volume of covering fire from Davidson, Rodriguez, Walsh, and Kim forced enemy shooters to take cover rather than aim carefully. They reached a boulder formation that provided concealment at approximately 40 meters from the hovering helicopter. Riley immediately began targeting procedures while Marcus provided security against ground forces attempting to flank their new position. "Target acquired," Riley announced, sighting through the EMP-7's targeting system at the helicopter's main rotor assembly where critical flight control electronics would be concentrated. The electromagnetic pulse struck the aircraft's electronic systems with devastating effect. Navigation computers failed instantly, communication equipment went dead, and most critically, the fly-by-wire flight control systems that provided stability assistance shut down completely. The helicopter pilot fought desperately to maintain control using manual controls alone, but modern military aircraft relied heavily on electronic assistance for stable flight. The aircraft immediately began oscillating wildly as the pilot struggled with sudden control difficulties. Marcus watched the helicopter descend rapidly toward the valley floor, auto-rotation procedures barely preventing a catastrophic crash. The aircraft struck the ground hard but remained intact, though clearly incapable of delivering additional troops to the ridgeline position. "Helicopter down," Marcus reported to his squad. Threat neutralized, but their tactical situation remained critical. Enemy ground forces continued advancing from multiple directions, and the disabled helicopter had simply eliminated one threat while others persisted. Riley's successful shot had bought them time, not victory. 3 shots remaining, Riley reported, checking her weapon's power levels, while they sprinted back toward the main defensive position. Enemy fire intensified as they crossed open ground, forcing them to bound between cover points while bullets struck rocks and trees around them. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of combat, heightened awareness, compressed time, and absolute focus on immediate survival. They reached the defensive perimeter as enemy forces began their final assault. Professional soldiers advanced using coordinated fire and movement tactics, with suppressive fire covering advancing elements while others maintained overwatch positions. "Ammunition critical," Kim called out, her automatic weapon firing in controlled bursts to conserve remaining rounds. Marcus made rapid calculations based on enemy numbers, remaining ammunition, and tactical options. Conventional defense was no longer sustainable. They needed to break contact immediately or face elimination. "Prepare for emergency extraction," Marcus ordered, referring to contingency plans they'd rehearsed but hoped never to implement. Emergency extraction meant abandoning their defensive position and attempting to reach the primary extraction point while pursued by superior enemy forces. Success would require speed, stealth, and tactical innovation rather than conventional firepower. But enemy forces had anticipated this option, positioning blocking forces along the most likely escape routes. Marcus could see muzzle flashes from positions that would interdict any movement toward the extraction zone. Rayleigh studied the enemy deployment pattern while considering remaining options for the EMP-7. Their communication system is coordinating this encirclement, she observed. If I can disrupt their ability to coordinate, it might create gaps we can exploit. Marcus understood her tactical reasoning. Professional military forces relied heavily on communication for coordination. Disrupting their ability to coordinate could create confusion and tactical opportunities. Where are their communication nodes? Marcus asked. Rayleigh pointed toward positions where enemy commanders appeared to be directing tactical movements. Primary coordination appears to be coming from that ridge position to the south. Secondary coordination from the valley floor near the crashed helicopter. Both positions were within EMP-7 range, but reaching effective firing positions would require additional movement under enemy fire. Riley's remaining 3 shots would need to be used strategically to create maximum disruption. Davidson Rodriguez, prepare to engage command positions with precision fire, Marcus ordered. Walsh Kim, suppressive fire on advancing elements. Patterson and I will target their communications. The coordinated assault began with precision. Rifle fire against identified enemy commanders, creating immediate confusion in their tactical coordination. Walsh and Kim engaged advancing enemy forces with automatic weapons, forcing them to seek cover and slowing their assault momentum. Marcus led Riley to a firing position with clear sightlines to the enemy command positions. Her first shot targeted the southern ridge position, disabling communication equipment and creating immediate coordination problems for that sector of the enemy force. The effect was visible immediately. Enemy forces that had been advancing in coordinated bounds suddenly became hesitant and disorganized. Without communication links to their commanders, individual units reverted to independent action rather than coordinated assault. Riley's second shot targeted the valley floor command position, further disrupting enemy coordination. Marcus watched through his binoculars as enemy forces began consolidating into defensive positions rather than continuing their assault. Communication disruption successful, Riley reported. 1 shot remaining. But the tactical situation remained desperate. Enemy forces still outnumbered Marcus's squad significantly, and the disruption of their communications was temporary. Professional soldiers would adapt quickly and resume coordinated operations using alternative methods. Movement to the northwest, Davidson reported. Enemy forces attempting to re-establish communication links. Marcus studied the enemy positions, looking for tactical opportunities created by their communication disruption. Several enemy units had become isolated from their main force, creating potential gaps in the encirclement. There, Marcus pointed to a section of the perimeter where communication disruption had created a temporary gap between enemy positions. That's our route out. The escape attempt would require perfect timing and coordination. Marcus's squad would need to move rapidly through the gap while enemy forces were still dealing with communication problems, then maintain movement speed to stay ahead of pursuit. Final shot, Marcus said to Riley. Target whatever gives us the best chance of reaching extraction. Riley studied the tactical situation through the EMP-7's targeting system, calculating which remaining electronic system would provide maximum advantage for their escape attempt. Enemy forces were beginning to adapt to communication loss, but still relied on electronic equipment for night vision and coordination. Night vision systems, Riley decided. Their overwatch positions are using electronic night vision to track movement. Disable those, and we can use darkness for concealment. Her final shot targeted the primary overwatch position, where enemy forces were using night vision equipment to monitor potential escape routes. The electromagnetic pulse disabled multiple sets of night vision goggles simultaneously, temporarily, blinding the overwatch positions. Move, Marcus commanded, leading his squad in a rapid advance through the gap in enemy positions. They sprinted across broken terrain in almost complete darkness, using night vision equipment that had been shielded against electromagnetic effects. Behind them, enemy forces shouted commands and fired blindly in their general direction. But accuracy was impossible without electronic night vision aids. The escape route led through dense forest that provided concealment but slowed movement. Marcus led the squad along a compass, bearing toward the extraction point while listening for sounds of pursuit behind them. "Pursuit sounds from multiple directions," Walsh reported quietly. "They're attempting to re-establish contact." Enemy forces were adapting to the loss of electronic advantages by spreading out and using sound discipline to track the escaping squad. Professional soldiers could function effectively without electronic aids when necessary, Marcus maintained. A rapid pace through the forest while calculating time and distance to the extraction point. They had covered approximately 2 kilometers, with 3 kilometers remaining to reach the helicopter landing zone. Dawn was approaching, which would eliminate their concealment advantages. "Communication check," Marcus whispered into his radio. Attempting to contact their extraction helicopter, static answered his call, indicating either equipment problems or enemy jamming of their communication frequencies. Without radio contact, they couldn't coordinate extraction timing or request emergency pickup at alternative locations. The forest began to thin as they approached the extraction zone, reducing concealment options but increasing movement speed. Marcus could see the designated landing area through the trees, an open meadow, surrounded by ridgelines that provided natural helicopter approaches, but enemy forces had anticipated their destination. Marcus spotted movement around the landing zone perimeter, indicating that blocking forces had reached the extraction point ahead of them. Riley moved beside Marcus as they observed the compromised landing zone. "They're using our own extraction plan against us," she whispered. Marcus studied the enemy positions around the landing zone, counting at least 8 soldiers in concealed positions. The extraction helicopter would face immediate fire upon arrival, making pickup impossible under current conditions. Alternative extraction, Marcus decided, referring to contingency plans that involved reaching secondary pickup zones, located further from the primary objective area, but secondary extraction points were 5 kilometers away through territory, now alerted to their presence. Enemy forces would have time to establish additional blocking positions and coordinate pursuit operations. The tactical situation had evolved beyond conventional military solutions. Marcus's squad faced professional enemy forces that had anticipated their escape routes and established effective countermeasures. Rayleigh's EMP-7 had provided critical advantages, but its ammunition was exhausted. As Marcus contemplated their increasingly desperate situation, he realized that Riley's toy gun had already saved their lives multiple times. Without the electromagnetic warfare capabilities, they would have been eliminated at the compound, during the fighting withdrawal, or during the helicopter engagement. But now, with no remaining EMP shots and enemy forces controlling their extraction point, they needed different solutions. The innovation and tactical thinking that had brought them this far would need to carry them through whatever came next. Dawn was breaking over the Carpathian Mountains, and with it came new challenges that would test every aspect of their training, equipment, and determination to survive. The early morning light revealed the full extent of their tactical predicament. Enemy forces had established interlocking fields of fire around the primary extraction zone, with additional patrols systematically searching the surrounding forest. Marcus counted at least 20 soldiers visible from their concealed observation position, with others undoubtedly positioned beyond his line of sight. Riley examined her exhausted EMP-7, its power indicator showing 0 remaining charges. "I have 1 fresh battery pack," she whispered, "but it requires 2 minutes for installation and system restart. 2 minutes of vulnerability while changing batteries under combat conditions. An eternity when enemy patrols were actively hunting them." Marcus studied the terrain between their position and potential battery replacement sites, calculating risks and timing. Enemy patrol approaching from the east, Davidson reported quietly, his precision rifle trained on movement approximately 300 meters away. 4 personnel, systematic search pattern. The patrol was following proper tactical procedures, maintaining spacing and mutual support while searching likely concealment areas. Their professionalism suggested they would eventually locate Marcus's squad unless immediate action was taken. Marcus made a tactical decision that violated conventional doctrine, but offered their only realistic chance of survival. "We're going to shadow that patrol," he announced. "Stay close enough to monitor their movement, but far enough to avoid detection." Following enemy forces required extraordinary stealth and discipline, but it would keep them mobile while the larger enemy force concentrated around the compromised extraction zone. More importantly, it might reveal gaps in enemy deployment that could be exploited. The squad moved through dense forest undergrowth, maintaining visual contact with the enemy patrol while remaining undetected. Rayleigh carried the EMP-7 at ready, positioned despite its depleted battery, understanding that circumstances might require rapid reloading under combat conditions. After 30 minutes of careful movement, the patrol reached a communication checkpoint where they reported their search status to higher command. Marcus observed the communication procedure with professional interest, noting equipment types and protocols that might be vulnerable to electromagnetic attack. "Standard military radios," Riley whispered, studying the enemy communication equipment through her binoculars. No apparent hardening against EMP effects. More importantly, Marcus could see that the communication checkpoint was positioned to coordinate search operations across the entire area. Disrupting communications at this central node could create confusion throughout the enemy force. "Battery replacement time?" Marcus asked. 90 seconds if we're not under fire," Riley replied. 3 minutes if we're taking incoming rounds." The enemy patrol moved away from the communication checkpoint, continuing their systematic search pattern. Marcus waited until they were beyond visual range before leading his squad to an overwatch position that provided clear sight lines to the communication node. "Davidson, Rodriguez, precision fire on communication personnel when Patterson engages," Marcus ordered. "Walsh, Kim, prepare to suppress any response from the checkpoint position." Rayleigh found a stable firing position behind a fallen log and began the delicate process of replacing the EMP-7's battery pack under field conditions. Her hands moved with practiced precision despite the stress of their tactical situation. 60 seconds, she reported, carefully connecting power connections while maintaining visual surveillance of the enemy position. Marcus watched the communication checkpoint through his binoculars, noting the positions of personnel and equipment. 3 enemy soldiers were maintaining the radio watch, with additional forces presumably within supporting distance. 30 seconds. Riley continued her countdown while conducting final system checks on the reloaded EMP-7. An unexpected complication arose when a second enemy patrol approached the communication checkpoint from the west. Marcus watched through his scope as the patrol leader approached the radio operators, creating a concentration of enemy personnel around the critical communication node. 8 targets at the checkpoint, Marcus reported quietly. Increased enemy density, but also increased disruption potential. Riley completed her battery replacement and brought the EMP-7 to ready status. System online, full power available. The electromagnetic pulse struck the communication equipment with devastating effectiveness, disabling radios, GPS devices, and electronic coordination systems simultaneously. But more importantly, it created immediate confusion among enemy forces, who suddenly lost contact with their command structure. Davidson and Rodriguez engaged with precision rifle fire, targeting enemy personnel at the communication checkpoint while they were still dealing with equipment failures. Walsh and Kim provided suppressive fire that prevented organized response from surrounding positions. The effect rippled across the entire enemy force as patrols lost communication with their coordination center. Marcus could hear frustrated radio calls echoing through the forest as various enemy units attempted to re-establish contact using backup frequencies and alternative equipment. Communication disruption successful, Riley reported. Enemy coordination degraded significantly. But Marcus understood that professional soldiers would adapt quickly to communication loss. They needed to exploit this temporary advantage before enemy forces reorganized using alternative methods. Movement towards secondary extraction, Marcus ordered, leading his squad away from the compromised primary landing zone toward backup pickup. Coordinates 5 kilometers to the northwest. The route to secondary extraction led through mountainous terrain that provided concealment, but challenged physical endurance. Marcus maintained a rapid pace while monitoring enemy response to the communication disruption behind them. Riley moved beside him, the recharged EMP-7, ready for immediate use against any electronic threats they might encounter. Her confidence had grown throughout the mission as her weapon repeatedly proved its effectiveness against professional military opposition. "Contact right," Walsh called out, engaging an enemy patrol that had maintained tactical cohesion despite communication disruption. The firefight was brief but intense, with enemy forces attempting to fix Marcus's squad in position while calling for reinforcements using visual signals and runners. Marcus led a rapid disengagement, breaking contact before superior enemy numbers could be brought to bear, but the encounter confirmed that enemy forces were adapting to communication loss and reorganizing using conventional military procedures. The temporary advantage gained by electromagnetic disruption was beginning to diminish. "How much further to secondary extraction?" Davidson asked during a brief halt to check their position and assess the tactical situation. Marcus consulted his GPS and calculated the remaining distance and time. 3 kilometers, approximately 45 minutes at current pace. 45 minutes through territory now alerted to their presence, with enemy forces conducting coordinated search operations. Despite communication disruption, the tactical mathematics remained challenging. Riley engaged her second shot against an enemy observation post that was using electronic surveillance equipment to track their movement. The electromagnetic pulse disabled night vision devices and motion sensors, creating a gap in enemy surveillance coverage. "Surveillance gap created," Riley reported. "Window for rapid movement through the detection zone." Marcus led his squad through the surveillance gap at maximum speed, using the temporary blind spot to cover significant distance toward the extraction point. Behind them, enemy forces continued their pursuit, but with reduced ability to track exact movements. The secondary extraction zone appeared through the forest as they crested a ridgeline overlooking a small valley. The designated landing area was a natural clearing surrounded by defensive positions that would allow the squad to provide security during helicopter pickup operations. But Marcus's tactical experience warned him to expect complications. Enemy forces had demonstrated sophisticated understanding of their operational patterns and might have anticipated the secondary extraction location as well. Reconnaissance before commitment, Marcus decided, leading his squad to an overwatch position that allowed detailed observation of the landing zone without exposing them to potential enemy forces. The extraction zone appeared clear of obvious enemy presence, but Marcus noticed subtle indicators that suggested recent human activity. Disturbed vegetation, slight changes in natural patterns, and other signs that trained observers could identify. Possible enemy presence in the landing zone, Marcus reported to his squad. Approach with extreme caution. Riley studied the potential landing area through her optical sight, looking for electronic signatures that might indicate hidden enemy surveillance or communication equipment. "I'm detecting possible electronic emissions from the tree line on the eastern edge," she observed. Electronic emissions suggested either enemy surveillance equipment or communication devices positioned to monitor the extraction zone. Professional. Military forces would have anticipated backup extraction sites and established appropriate countermeasures. Third shot to clear the landing zone? Marcus asked. Riley calculated range and target parameters for engaging suspected electronic equipment. In the tree line. 50-meter range, optimal effectiveness against surveillance systems. The electromagnetic pulse struck the tree line position where electronic emissions had been detected. Immediately, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of equipment failure, as electronic devices lost power simultaneously. But the electromagnetic attack also revealed the extent of enemy preparation. Multiple positions around the landing zone showed signs of activity as concealed personnel responded to the equipment failures, indicating a sophisticated ambush that had been carefully prepared. The landing zone was compromised, Marcus reported. Enemy forces in prepared positions throughout the area. The secondary extraction point was as thoroughly compromised as the primary location. Enemy forces had anticipated their backup plans and established countermeasures accordingly, demonstrating intelligence gathering and tactical planning that exceeded typical terrorist capabilities. Riley looked at Marcus with growing concern as their options continued to diminish. "What do we do now?" Marcus studied the tactical situation with the analytical approach that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. To extraction. Points compromised, enemy forces conducting coordinated pursuit operations, ammunition levels decreasing, and physical endurance becoming a factor after hours of continuous movement. But one critical element had changed throughout the mission. Rayleigh's electromagnetic warfare capabilities had repeatedly provided tactical advantages that conventional weapons couldn't match. The toy gun that Marcus had initially dismissed had become their primary survival tool. "We create our own extraction point," Marcus decided, forming a plan that relied entirely on the EMP-7's unique capabilities. Modern military helicopters use sophisticated navigation and communication systems to coordinate pickup operations. But they also carried emergency protocols that allowed for alternative extraction procedures when standard communications were unavailable. "Can the EMP-7 send signals as well as disable equipment?" Marcus asked. Riley's eyes widened as she understood his tactical reasoning. "It can generate electromagnetic pulses in specific patterns," she replied. "Theoretically, those patterns could be interpreted as emergency signals by aircraft with appropriate receiving equipment. Emergency extraction signals using electromagnetic pulses, an unconventional communication method that enemy forces wouldn't anticipate or be able to intercept. But success would require precise timing and coordination with their extraction helicopter. How long until scheduled pickup time?" Marcus asked. Davidson checked his chronometer. 90 minutes until the primary extraction window opens. 90 minutes to reach a position where they could signal their extraction helicopter using electromagnetic pulses, while avoiding enemy forces that controlled both designated landing zones. The plan required innovation, precise execution, and considerable tactical risk, but conventional approaches had been systematically countered by enemy forces that demonstrated sophisticated operational planning. Unconventional solutions offered their only remaining chance for survival. Marcus looked at Riley and her toy gun with complete confidence in capabilities he had initially dismissed. The electromagnetic warfare device that had seemed so impractical during training exercises had become their lifeline in actual combat. "Let's go signal our ride," Marcus said, leading his squad toward high ground where electromagnetic signals could reach maximum range and effectiveness. The final phase of their escape would test every lesson they had learned about innovation, adaptation, and the power of unconventional thinking in desperate circumstances. The hilltop position overlooked the entire valley. providing clear sight lines in all directions and optimal conditions for electromagnetic signal transmission. Marcus positioned his squad in a defensive perimeter while Riley prepared the EMP-7 for the most unconventional use of her career. Signal pattern needs to match emergency extraction protocols, Riley explained, consulting technical manuals on her tablet. 3 pulses, 5-second intervals, repeated every 30 seconds. The electromagnetic pulses would create distinctive interference patterns that trained helicopter crews could recognize as emergency signals. But the technique was theoretical. No one had actually tested electromagnetic communication under combat conditions. Enemy patrol movement from the southeast, Kim reported, observing through her rifle scope. 6 personnel, approximately 800 meters in closing. Time was running out. The extraction helicopter would arrive within the next 20 minutes. But enemy forces were converging on their position. Riley would need to transmit her emergency signals while the squad defended against superior numbers. Begin transmission, Marcus ordered. Riley triggered the first pulse sequence, sending electromagnetic energy across the valley in carefully timed intervals. The invisible signals propagated through the atmosphere, hopefully reaching the extraction helicopter's receivers before enemy forces could locate and engage their transmission point. Pulse 1 complete, Riley reported, continuing sequence. The enemy patrol reached the base of the hill and began advancing up the slope using tactical movement procedures. Marcus could see additional enemy forces approaching from other directions, suggesting coordinated convergence on their position. Defensive fire on my command, Marcus called to his squad, preparing for what might be their final engagement. Riley continued transmitting emergency signals while bullets began impacting around their position. The electromagnetic pulses required precise timing and power settings, making concentration difficult under combat stress. Incoming helicopter, Davidson suddenly announced, pointing toward distant aircraft approaching from the northwest. Marcus grabbed his binoculars and identified the aircraft as their extraction helicopter, still several kilometers away, but flying directly toward their position. Riley's electromagnetic signals had successfully guided the crew to their location, but enemy forces had also seen the approaching helicopter and were intensifying their assault to prevent extraction. Automatic weapons fire swept across the hilltop position while enemy forces advanced from multiple directions. Landing zone preparation, Marcus shouted over the increasing gunfire. Patterson, continuous signaling for final approach guidance. Riley maintained electromagnetic pulse transmission while taking cover behind rocks and equipment. Her signals would guide the helicopter to precise landing coordinates. Despite enemy attempts to disrupt the extraction, the helicopter pilot demonstrated exceptional skill, approaching the hilltop landing zone while taking enemy fire from multiple positions. Marcus could see bullet strikes on the aircraft's armored hull, but the crew maintained their approach vector. 30 seconds to touchdown. The pilot's voice crackled through their restored communication system as the helicopter's proximity overcame enemy jamming efforts. Marcus led suppressive fire against enemy positions, while his squad prepared for rapid extraction under fire. This was the most dangerous moment, transitioning from defensive positions to the helicopter, while maintaining fire superiority against overwhelming enemy numbers. Extract by pairs, Marcus commanded. Davidson and Rodriguez first, then Walsh and Kim. The first 2 squad members sprinted to the helicopter under covering fire, successfully boarding while the aircraft maintained hover position despite continued enemy fire. Marcus could see the crew chief providing suppressive fire from the helicopter's door-mounted weapon. Walsh and Kim move. Marcus called for the second extraction pair. 2 more squad members successfully reached the helicopter, leaving only Marcus and Riley in the defensive position. Enemy forces were now within grenade range, making their situation critical. Final extraction, Marcus said to Riley. Stay close and run straight to the aircraft. They sprinted across the landing zone together while enemy bullets cracked past their position. Marcus felt the familiar rush of combat adrenaline as they covered the final meters to safety, Riley clutching the EMP-7 that had repeatedly saved their lives. The helicopter lifted off immediately upon their boarding, climbing rapidly while taking additional enemy fire from the hilltop position. Marcus watched through the aircraft's window as enemy forces converged on the now empty landing zone. All personnel accounted for, the crew chief reported. Extraction successful. As the helicopter gained altitude and distance from the combat zone, Marcus finally allowed himself to process what they had accomplished. His squad had completed their intelligence mission, survived contact with superior enemy forces, and escaped through innovation and unconventional tactics. Riley sat across from him in the helicopter's cargo bay, the EMP-7 secured across her lap. Her face showed exhaustion mixed with satisfaction, the expression of someone who had proven herself under extreme conditions. "Outstanding performance," Marcus said, speaking loud enough to be heard over the helicopter's engine noise. "Your weapon saved our lives multiple times." Riley smiled, though Marcus could see the emotional impact of her first combat experience beginning to register. "I never imagined using it for helicopter guidance signals." "Innovation under pressure," Marcus replied. "That's what separates professional soldiers from everyone else." During the flight back to base, Marcus reflected on his transformation from skeptic to believer. The electromagnetic warfare capabilities that had seemed so unconventional during training exercises had proven decisive in actual combat. Rayleigh's toy gun had disabled enemy vehicles, disrupted communications, eliminated surveillance systems, and ultimately guided their extraction helicopter to safety. The after-action review would document lessons learned and tactical innovations that could be applied to future operations. But Marcus already understood the most important lesson. Modern warfare required adaptation to new technologies and unconventional thinking about tactical problems. 3 hours later, standing in the debriefing room at Fort Braxton, Marcus addressed the assembled command staff with complete conviction. The EMP-7 system performed beyond expectations under combat conditions. I recommend immediate approval for widespread deployment. Captain Torres smiled at Marcus's dramatic change of opinion. "Quite different from your initial assessment of the toy gun, Sergeant Chun." Marcus looked at Riley, who was providing technical details about electromagnetic warfare applications to fascinated intelligence officers. "Ma'am, sometimes the most effective weapons don't look like weapons at all. The intelligence gathered during Operation Silent Thunder led to the disruption of terrorist networks across Eastern Europe. The electronic warfare techniques pioneered by Riley's team became standard doctrine for special operations forces worldwide. But for Marcus, the most important outcome was personal. He had learned to recognize innovation and effectiveness regardless of conventional appearance. The young engineer with her unconventional weapon had taught him that adaptability and open-mindedness were just as important as traditional military skills. 6 months later, when Marcus received orders for his next deployment, he specifically requested Rayleigh Patterson as his technical specialist. The toy gun that he had once mocked would accompany them on future missions, where electromagnetic warfare capabilities continued to provide decisive tactical advantages. The partnership between the experienced soldier and the innovative engineer had proven that modern military success required both traditional skills and cutting-edge technology. Most importantly, it required the wisdom to recognize effectiveness in unexpected forms and the courage to trust new solutions when conventional approaches reached their limits. Marcus never again dismissed equipment based on appearance alone, and Riley's electromagnetic warfare systems became legendary among special operations forces for their unconventional effectiveness in impossible situations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.